Can a simple exchange of positions between colleagues unleash a crisis in Ferrari? And what did Fred Vasseur mean with his ultimatum behind Baku? Today we are going to crumble word for word what was said, and what was not said, but is about to explode inside the rampant Cavallino. The Azerbaijan 2025 Grand Prix should be, in theory, Ferrari's redemption scenario. The urban layout of Baku, with its long, straight and demanding technical zones, favored the characteristics of the SF25, a car that had left good feelings in the simulations of post-SPA race rhythm and that had shown clear progress in classification. Everything pointed out that this time they could fight at least for a podium, but for victory. But the result was catastrophic. And not only in sports terms. It was an emotional break within the team. The race in Baku was not simply a disappointment. It was a mirror that crudely reflected all the structural and human weaknesses that Ferrari has been dragging for years. Lewis Hamilton finished 8th, Charles Leclerc 9th, far behind what his potential had suggested during training. The most disconcerting is that, in terms of pure rhythm, the car had to compete with. They knew it since Friday. The simulations were optimistic. And yet, everything collapsed for execution errors. Late decisions in boxes, mismanagement of traffic, lack of radio coordination, and, as if that were not enough, a tense internal dynamic between its two-star pilots. Fred Vasseur, known for his restrained and diplomatic profile, could not even hide his frustration. In front of the press, his statements were harder than usual. He spoke with a surgical coldness that hurt more than a cry. He said the team had failed. They had the pace for more, but they did not know how to capitalize it. That improving the car is of no use if it is not executed correctly in the race. And it was not only strategic failures or a bad pit stop. In Baku, Ferrari showed that his problem is systemic. Team orders were late. The management of the track positions was confusing. And at times, it seemed that each pilot was running their own career, ignoring the collective plan. The exchange of positions poorly executed between Leclerc and Hamilton was just the tip of the iceberg. The most worrying was the inability of the wall to anticipate scenarios, to lead clearly and authoritatively. In a team that aspires to win championships, there can be no doubts. And in Ferrari, doubts abound. This organizational and emotional chaos cannot be understood without looking at the broader context. Last season, Ferrari finished second in builders, recovering some credibility after years of stumbling. Leclerc closed 2024 with 5 victories. Vasseur was applauded to stabilize the ship. But in 2025, with the arrival of Hamilton and the expectations in the clouds, the margin of error is null. And in Baku, they made all possible mistakes all together in one afternoon. Hamilton, accustomed to high-demand environments such as Mercedes, seems to be living a cultural clash with the way Ferrari manages on weekends. And Leclerc, on the other hand, is in the eye of the hurricane, forced to give space to a living legend, but without being willing to give up its status as a natural leader of the team. All this caused Baku to become more than a failed career. It was a symbolic battlefield where power began to be defined within the Scuderia. And while the media already began to speculate on future friction, Vasseur launched their message. Frontal. No filters. He said it in plural, but the recipient was clear. It was a call for attention to all, yes, but especially those who have the red steering wheel in their hands, to whom they must run under pressure, to whom, in theory, they must lead. The big question now is whether this Baku disaster was just a stumble, or the first symptom of a larger collapse that Ferrari does not know how to contain. The race in Baku not only fractured Ferrari's morals in the points table. What really collapsed was something much more difficult to repair. The relationship between their two pilots. A link that, from the first day, was sold as a strategic association, but that in the background was always a time bomb. And that bomb finally exploded. It all started with a team order. Charles Leclerc, who had started better positioned, allowed Lewis Hamilton to advance it with cooler tires in a maneuver designed to attack the cars they had ahead. It was a logical tactic. Monegasco momentarily sacrificed his position with the implicit or explicit promise that they would return it if the strategy did not bear fruit. But that return never came as it should. At the end of the race, when there was no possibility of winning more positions, Ferrari ordered Hamilton to give up the place again to Leclerc. He did, yes, but not completely. Lewis reduced his speed, but did so marginally that he prevented Leclerc completing the overflow before crossing the finish line. They were thousands, but the gesture was very clear. What was supposed to be a strategic correction ended up being a demonstration of power. Hamilton kept the 8th place. Leclerc finished 9th. But the final classification was the least. What was evident is that neither is willing to give in to the other. and that within Ferrari there is no clear authority to impose a functional order between them. Leclerc's reaction was immediate and brutal. In a later interview, he released a phrase that froze everyone in Maranello. There are rules that we know we have to comply. And perhaps those rules were not respected today. He did not mention Hamilton directly. It was not necessary. This is not a simple touch of competition. It is a clash of philosophies. Leclerc represents the emotional, visceral pilot that runs with the heart and that needs to feel the absolute backup of the team to shine. Hamilton, on the other hand, is the strategist, the one who measures every step, who manipulates the environment to take advantage. There is no correct formula, but there is an obvious incompatibility. Ferrari, in the midst of this tension, is caught. The direction of Vasseur is committed to keeping both happy, but what we saw in Baku demonstrates that this diplomacy has a limit. And when personal interests collide with those of the team, someone has to impose an order. Until now, nobody has done it. And this leads us to a crucial point. How long can Ferrari survive with two leaders who do not recognize each other as the same? Because one thing is to have two champions. Another, very different, is to get them to work together. Leclerc's words were not a passing complaint. They were a cry for help. A clear sign that harmony in Ferrari is no longer sustainable. And the most worrying thing is that we are in the third race of the year. If this happens now, what can happen when the championship enters its most intense phase? Fred Vasseur's words after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix were not simple post-carrier statements, nor were they a superficial criticism of execution. What Ferrari's chief pronounced was a carefully loaded message, a warning wrapped in technicalism, and at the same time, an unequivocal sign that something very deep is failing in Maranello's core. Since his arrival, Vasseur has struggled to stabilize a historically unstable structure. He reduced mistakes in boxes, cleaned internal hierarchies, and professionalized strategic processes that for years seemed last-minute improvisations. But in Baku, what exploded was not the car, it was the system. And the Frenchman immediately understood. Therefore, his statements were surgical. He started recognizing frustration, but he did it precisely by the two areas that are doing more damage to Ferrari: performance and execution. He said, textually, that both aspects must be synchronized if we want to aspire to something serious. When he speaks of execution, not only refers to a bad pit stop or a failed strategy. It refers to the complete management of the weekend, how orders are communicated, how hierarchies are respected, how individual interests are aligned with those of the team. And what happened between Hamilton and Leclerc was, in that sense, the most serious symptom of all. Vasseur knows that he cannot afford a second 2019. That year, Ferrari also had two competitive Leclerc and Vettel drivers, and the poorly managed rivalry ended up costing them not only points, but credibility as contestants. Now, with Hamilton on board, the expectation is even greater, and the margin of error minor. Vasseur's public message, therefore, fulfills a double function. It is a warning to the press to show that he is in command, but it is also an internal warning. A way to tell your pilots that this will not climb without consequences. That Ferrari is not to be hostage of egos, or to allow each one to weigh more than the Cavallino shield. But this is where the situation becomes more delicate, because Vasseur is in a complicated political position. You have to balance the pressure of keeping Lewis Hamilton happy, a living legend of Formula One, with the need not to lose Charles Leclerc, her talent formed at home, and still considered by many as the future of the team. The problem is that Hamilton has not come to Ferrari to be a mentor. He has come to win. And Leclerc is not going to give that throne so easily, especially now that he feels that they are removing ground within the team that formed it. Vasseur then walks on a tightrope. If you lean too much towards one, you will lose the other. If it does not impose order now, it runs the risk of seeing how the entire 2025 project disintegrates from the inside. When the lights went out in Baku and the cars crossed the goal, the final classification showed Lewis Hamilton in 8th position and Charles Leclerc in the novena. But that results table was just a facade. Because what really ended at that time was the harmony mask that Ferrari had tried to maintain since the beginning of the season. What broke in Azerbaijan was not just a failed strategy or a disappointing result. It was something much more fundamental. Trust broke. And when that happens among teammates, the consequence is not measured at points, but in internal breakup. The most alarming of Baku was not the strategic error. It was that Leclerc does not trust his partner. And that Hamilton, with all his experience, has made it clear that he is not here to play anyone's second pilot. Fred Vasseur knows it. He knows that visible cracks this time can become uncontrollable fissures if they are not contained in time. But he also understands that his maneuver margin is limited. You cannot order submission to two personalities like those in your garage. You have to build a balance, and that balance today does not exist. And there lies the great dilemma of the Scuderia. Can anyone like Hamilton accept a project that staggers emotionally? And can Leclerc continue to be the central figure of a team that seems to lean more and more towards a new order of priorities?